Okay, so the first thing you want to do is take a look at the power supply unit. So is the power supply unit working or is it not working? So if the machine is turning on and you got light to it, there's a good chance the power supply is okay. That's not guaranteed though, because the power supply itself may not be outputting the proper power to the drives and to the CPU, etc, etc. So how do you test it? Well, you could use a multimeter, or you could just get yourself one of these little simple devices. This will actually give you a result straight away. So turn off the power supply, and as you can see, you got the option here for 24 ports or 20. So I plug in the complete 20 in this case. Turn the power supply back on. This has a little built-in capacitor load, so it'll give you an answer. So there you are. So that power supply is working fine. As you can hear, it's now turning on as well. So what else can you do? Well, turn off the power supply again. This power supply obviously has the 24 part, so we can take out all that. We'll link it together. I'm going to plug that in. Now let's see what happens. Still everything's okay. So this power supply is working fine. There's no problems with it. If this power supply wasn't working fine, you may find the 12 volts were down, or the 3.5 was down, or the +5 was down. You know, you might find a problem with it, but in this case this power supply is fine. It's working perfectly. So if you don't have one of these testers and you happen to have a power supply you know is working, well, you have two PCs. So you turn on your machine, no power to it, no lights, no nothing, but you have another PC where the lights are turning on. Swap the power supplies. See if the PC that was dead is now alive again. If it's not, suspect something on the board, which we'll get to in a minute. So let's say we want to test some other parts of the power supply. Again, match these arrows up. Again, what we can do is we can actually test the 12 volt rail. So supplementary supply could be faulty. This is a 12 volt supply that was the first supplementary to the 20 pin ATX standard. This was the next supplement mainly in servers and that sort of stuff. It didn't come into, you know, the mainstream motherboard till, you know, demands increased for video cards and so on and so forth. Anyway, let's get back to our point. Our point is we're testing the power. Is this working? We know it is. So the next thing to do is the 12 volts coming into the motherboard, is that working? Is that okay? So now let's have a look. Yep, that's coming up, so that's okay. So that's not the problem. What else could be the problem? Well, the next problem could be a problem with our SATA. So again, we plug in the SATA. If I can get it to go in there, now it'll be absolutely magic. There we are. So power's in. Yep. So we got 12 and 5. Now the reason why the 5 is lighting up here and not in the other one is the other one's only supplying 12 volts. This one is supplying a 12 volt and a 5 volt on the SATA end of things. We can take that out. We can plug that in. Okay? After a few moments it does turn off, just in case you're wondering, it's supposed to do that. So we can plug in the Molex connector now. Turn off the power supply. Turn on the power supply. Again, fine. So you may find that one of these is faulty. So if the machine isn't turning on properly or you're getting weird hard drive errors, test every single one of these, including the floppy drive, and test them all, because it may just be a fault on one of the rails and not all of them, and that can be hard to detect. So test them all. This is a simple little device. Now I'm going to show you a slightly more advanced version of this. Same idea. This one's cheap and cheerful, does the job. This one here is a little bit more advanced, but it's the same idea. So again, plug in the power, like so. Turn on the power supply. In this case, we've got a little switch, which is this one. We get a bit more comprehensive. We got the power good showing up now. We got the the 5 volt rail. We got the 12 volt rail. We got the 3 volt rail. We got the plus 12 volt rail. We got the plus 5 volt rail. So basically we're showing everything in this one. So these, that's correct, that's correct, that's correct, that's okay, that's okay, that's acceptable. It all depends on what the actually you can't even see that in the video, come to think of it. That's a shame, it's not coming up. Try that again. No. Ah, there we are. So, oh, it's gone again. See? So, as you can see, you've got your various inputs from that cable. So it's basically going to show you your plus 5 volt, your minus 5 volt, your 3 volt, your 12 volt, and so on. And as you can see, they're all correct. If there's a problem, this will actually flash red as well, so you'll actually know. So it's the same thing again on the end, except what you have on this one, which you don't have on the other one, is you have the option for the video card test, which is very handy nowadays. You got the Molex and serial ATA, and you've got the new, addition to this baby. So you got the 8-pin version of this. So again, that'll only go in one side of this, and you can test for it. It'll tell you how you test for it. You just cycle through, and it'll actually cycle through the different options here and tell you which one's okay and which one's not okay. It'll flash red. It'll tell you. So this actually is an intelligent device. So even if I get something wrong, it knows it's right because it's within the limits of what it's supposed to be, and it'll just go green and it'll be the end of it. So we've determined that the power supply is okay. So now what do we do? Well, the next thing we want to do is have a look at the actual motherboard itself, the physical motherboard, and see if it's okay. Okay, the first thing to rule out in this situation is to have a look at the board itself inside the case and say to yourself, ask yourself the question, have I changed something? Have I added something? And in doing so, is that particular device or peripheral faulty? Is it something that's stuck into the USB port? Is it something that's stuck into the parallel port? Is there a monitor plugged into the VGA port? Yes, monitors can stop PCs from turning on. Perfect example. I had 2 customers. They both had a Taitung PC. Both machines were giving trouble. This is at the start of the plug and play saga. So what I decided to do, just out of pig iron and pure as if it were, I decided to swap over the monitors. And lo and behold, now both PCs booted up. Now this was after, of course, I had cleaned the machines up and reinstalled Windows 95 and a whole lot of other things. So I had only discovered the monitor fault again by pure accident. What had happened was I had the machine running on my setup, because obviously I'd have a setup where I'd have my own keyboards and monitors and all that, because I knew there were known good working parts, which is always a good thing to do. Make sure you use known good working parts, like good keyboard, good mouse and so on, because they can also be faulty. So I had the machine up and running. The machines were running, no problem at all. And then I just, for some reason, I can't actually remember why, I decided, feck, I better check the monitors working with this particular machine. So I plugged John's monitor into John's PC, and it didn't work properly, it was faulty. So I took the PC down and I plugged it back into my setup, and it was working again. So I went back to the monitor again, and the same thing again. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. So what did I do? I tried the other machine, because I was getting worried now. I was like saying, well, that machine's not working, maybe I've done something wrong. I tried the other one, the same thing happened again. So I was thinking to myself, that doesn't make any sense. I says, how can that be possible? Why would it be like that? Why would that fault exist? So what I did next was, I decided to swap the monitors. I swapped the monitors, and lo and behold, they worked. So now I had a bit of a problem. I wanted to make sure that I was honest with the customer. I wanted to make sure that what I did was basically all above board. So I rang the first customer, told him what happened. He said, yeah, no problem, you can swap them. I says, well, there's no problem swapping them, but I better ring the other fella first to make sure he's okay with it. So I rang him and told him what was going on. And he said, yeah, no problem, you can swap them, everything's okay. So thankfully it worked out for the two of them, and they both saw sense. Gas thing about it is, one of the guys rang me up because I had said to him that I had a very unusual CPU and a Cyrix Media GX, which was unusual then, even when it was new. And he said, do you remember that machine? I says, yeah, you can have it. So that's how I have my Media GX. Well, one of them anyway. Oh, he did offer me the motherboard as well. Or not the monitor, and I said, nah, you're okay, you can keep the monitor. Okay, so back to this board, just to prove the point. So take everything out. First thing to do is unplug absolutely everything. Keyboards, mice, USB devices, serial devices if they're on there, old parallel printers, everything. Take everything out and turn it on. Doesn't look like it's booting, doesn't look like it's working. Then plug in the video card, the video display. Is it now working? Yes, it is. Problem solved. Let's say it isn't. Next thing to do is check the motherboard itself. Check the motherboard itself for blown capacitors. Are any of these bloated? Are they listing over to the side? Is there a crack? Is there a leak? Is there a split? Are there any broken tracks on the board? Is there anything oozing out onto the board and causing corrosion? Is there any rust? Is there any water in the machine? Okay, check for these things religiously. Have a look at the connector itself. Make sure that the connector for the power supply is plugged in nice and tight and there's no problems with it whatsoever. If that's loose in any way, shape or form, obviously it's not going to turn on either. But we're going to presume the machine is turning on. If the machine is turning on, we may have another problem. We may have a problem with the RAM. What do we do there? Well, best thing to do there is to change out the RAM for another known good working piece. But before you even do that, take out the RAM and simply reinsert it. That can be enough. That can be enough to clean the contacts at the bottom of the video card of the actual RAM. It'll be enough to clean the contacts, and the RAM now works again. PC boots. Check the CPU. Make sure the cooler is seated correctly. On more modern machines, if the CPU cooling fan isn't seated correctly, the CPU will start to overheat. The machine will shut down and go into a safe mode. Some of the A&D machines will just catch fire and that'll be the end of it. But let's not go there. So make sure that's seated correctly. Also, the fan itself, unplug the fan from the motherboard, or in this case here, unplug it from the power supply. This may also be faulty. Is the machine turning on now? Maybe it is. That's your problem. Replace the CPU cooling fan. Let's say it's not that. What else could it be? Have a look at the actual board itself. Now, I'm just going to populate this board for a minute, because you may have a problem with the likes of the network card. That could be the problem. You may have problems with the likes of the AGP card or PCI Express card as we now use. Sort of undo that tangle there. So maybe these are the problem. Maybe these have come loose a bit. If they have come loose a bit, just a little bit of looseness will cause them not to work. So take them out. Take them out, no harm. Plug them back in again. Make sure they're okay. On more modern machines, of course, you've got a power supply going into these video cards. So make sure that the power going into the video card is A, working correctly. So test it with the testing machine we just showed you. So get your little tester out, plug it into here, and make sure that that power coming out of that power supply is working correctly. If it isn't, you got a faulty power supply, change it. You change the faulty power supply, you plug it in and it works. You're working. What do? Maybe it's the video card that's faulty. Change the video card out and put in another known good working video card. Even put that video card in another machine. You might find that it works in a different machine but doesn't work in your machine. Try it anyway. Ask your friends if they've got a video card you can borrow. Make sure these cards are plugged in correctly. If they aren't, the machine can cease to function, can cease to turn on. Another very simple one is the motherboard is screwed in to the case. Let's say you over-tighten one of those screws. If you over-tighten one of those screws, you may cause a bend in the motherboard. A bend in the motherboard, no matter how slight or no matter how minor, will cause problems. Will stop it to turn on. So make sure there's no bends in the motherboard. How do you check for that? Loosen all the screws, just a little bit, and see if the motherboard turns on. Now, if it was working before that, and it's not a new build, then it's not going to be a bend in the motherboard. But if it is a machine where it wasn't working, well, if it is a new build, yes, check and make sure you haven't over-tightened any screws. If it's an existing build, yeah, you can probably skip that step. What can you do as well? You can also change this battery. You may think it's very minor, but believe me, a simple thing of this battery being faulty can also cause a problem. And before people leave comments down the bottom, I've been doing this for a long time. Believe me, the most simplest things can cause problems. I've had a motherboard where the system battery had failed. This battery was faulty. This little battery was faulty. Caused a problem with the BIOS, which I couldn't understand. Couldn't understand why the machine wasn't turning on. I was nearly about to give it the heave-ho and said, you know what? I'm going to change the battery. So now when I get a machine in that I know is a few years old, and I know they haven't changed the battery because nobody ever does, you should really change these batteries every few years, by the way. I changed the battery anyway. They're only €2. Why not? You can get them cheaper, even maybe even €1 you can get them for. For €2, the machine works again. Why not? Change the battery. If you've got one of these batteries in your own machine at home, change it. Take it out of there. Put a new one in. Matter of fact, this needs a new battery. That's an old Toshiba battery. That should say Maxell. That's what I'm using now. So, you change the battery. Make sure you clear the CMOS. Check your motherboard manual to see how you change the CMOS, the blanket. Find out how to do it. Blanket. Let's say you could have you could have, your kids could have, your neighbours could have, your kid's best friend could have, the dog could have changed the BIOS settings, and that's causing the machine to stop booting up. So make sure you check those BIOS settings. If you can't get into the BIOS, the machine won't turn on. Simply turn off the machine, take out the battery. That'll usually blank it if you can't find the BIOS, the little BIOS blanking chip. So what else could be the problem? Well, okay, so what else could be the problem? Well, let's say it's a new build and you just installed a new CPU. Check the manual and see what CPUs it supports. You may find that it supports the new Hong Kong 111 beep 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 processor, but the BIOS doesn't support it. So make sure that your BIOS supports the new processor. A lot of times a motherboard will come out saying it supports a new type of processor, a new brand or a new generation. But the little BIOS over here has been updated to understand this new CPU. So of course it won't turn on. What can also happen is that you turn on the machine and it reads it at, let's say, 1 gigahertz when it should be 60 gigahertz. So that can be a problem. Update the BIOS. Very good thing to do, especially on a new machine. But be warned. Be very careful changing the BIOS, because if you make it wrong, you might end up with a dead machine. Although on more modern motherboards there are slight advantages. The USB port in a lot of modern motherboards will allow you to actually update a BIOS of a machine that was flashed incorrectly. Have I ever flashed a BIOS incorrectly? Have I ever had one fail? No. Thank God. I actually haven't, and I've flashed a lot of them, and I haven't. And I've had to flash them using the DOS prompt. So believe me, that's amazing. So if it's a new build as well, check the RAM. Make sure the RAM is the correct type. Is it DDR? Is it DDR2? Is it DDR3? Is it DDR4? Is it SD RAM? Is it DDR RAM? What type of RAM is in the machine? Is the RAM compatible with the motherboard? For example, this RAM here could be Millennium X50, but this motherboard only supports Millennium X501, the new generation. Is it party RAM? Is it non-party RAM? Some motherboards support party RAM. Most motherboards won't unless they're a server motherboard. What's a party bit? Well, the reason for that bit is for servers, because these allow errors, whereas a server doesn't want to have an error because it's a server. It wants to be accurate all the time. Servers can't have errors. Errors mean problems, and problems mean shutdowns, and shutdowns mean loss of money. That's another video for another day. So what else could it be? Well, we've looked at the CPU. We've noticed that there's nothing blown on the motherboard. Everything looks okay. What could it be? Could it be the motherboard is dead? The motherboard itself could be faulty. Take out the CPU, take out the RAM, plug it into another motherboard, and see if it turns on then. If it turns on then, you've got a faulty motherboard. And you know what? That's the way it goes. So, what else is there? If the video card you plugged in, you're getting no joy, go and get a known working video card. One that you know works. Like, this is an example of a video card that I know works. I have a working machine. This is one of my older test machines. But I have a known working machine. Now, this would have been one of them here originally. And I would take the CPU out of this and test it with other machines and so on and so forth. But I know that video card's working. So when I plug that in there, I know with, a fair degree of certainty that motherboard should now turn on with that video card built in there. If it doesn't, I know I've got one or two problems. Either the video cards are dying, which is probably unlikely, or the problem with the motherboard. So when you're doing a lot of testing in machines, you will probably have multiple machines for testing. Again, the likes of the network cards, they can be a problem. So what else can be the problem? Well, let's turn the motherboard around. Floppy drives, if you still use them. The primary IDE, ATA I should say. The secondary ATA. These can be a problem. Why can be a problem? If you've got a cable plugged into these, plug into the first hard drive and the first CD-ROM drive, or DVD drive or Blu-ray, well, Blu-ray wouldn't be on that particular device, it'd be an SATA. So, let's say you've got a hard drive, or a CD-ROM drive, or a DVD drive plugged in here. That's fine, it's all fair and good. Unplug them. Take the power out of them, and take them out of the motherboard, and see the machine boots. If the machine doesn't boot with a good power supply, and you're still having trouble, the next line of attack is to take everything off the board that's not needed. So in this case here, we can actually take out that video card because we've got a built-in one. So we should be able to boot from that inbuilt video card. So what would we do? Well, we take out the video cards, network cards, we take all the devices off that are here, floppy drives, hard drives, CD-ROM drives, etc, etc. Leave the power in, obviously. See if the machine turns on. If the machine turns on, yeah, that's pretty good. You've gotten somewhere. You've now got a green light. At least now you have an idea that chances are the board is okay and the power supply is okay. Another thing to look out for is this little fella down here. I talked about this before. This is the little crystal that oscillates for your real-time clock. Make sure the legs on that are still intact and still there. If they're broken, severed, or otherwise disappeared, yeah, you've got a problem. You can see that they're intact. So if that's gone or broken, that's going to cause the machine to turn on because everything relies on that little crystal on the board. What else can you do? I've already mentioned taking everything out and reseating it. One thing to do as well is to make sure that the thermal paste between the CPU and the cooling fan is in good nick. It doesn't usually cause a problem. In the case of this one here, the CPU will just heat up and heat up and heat up and catch fire. In the case of the Intels, what they generally used to do was they would heat up, yes, and then go into a lower power mode. So instead of running at 1 gigahertz, for example, they start running at 800 megahertz, 600, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, until such a stage as they were running basically like a 386. And that was to keep them cool. Very good little feature. Unfortunately, the AMDs didn't have that, and they used to just catch fire. So it's quite spectacular to watch them catch fire. I'm not going to do it to this poor little chip. So anyway, that's the basics. That's everything that I can think of. I'm hoping I've been somewhat informative. I hope I've given you some sort of idea of what to look for. And I do appreciate you watching these videos. If you like them, give me a thumbs up. If you hate it, give it a thumbs down. Other than that, leave a comment down below, ask questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. The information in these videos is as accurate as I want it to be. If I want to leave out some information on purpose, I will. Because at the end of the day, if I leave out some information, do you know what? I'm in business. Just kidding. Anyway, seriously, thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. And yeah, I like doing them because it keeps my mind fresh on them. And that's why I like doing the videos. Because if I don't do them, I find I go a bit rusty in some of this old stuff. So yeah, there you are. So these rules apply to modern machines as well as old machines. The few rules that are there. So yeah. Also, another quick one for you is make sure the board is making contact with any parts of the case, because if these little metallic parts are in contact with the case, that can also stop the machine from turning on properly. So thanks for watching. Good night.